Hey, all y'all. Nice to see you, especially because I've been out of the loop for a little bit. Y'all still making podcasts or stuff like that? Public media? Okay, good. Great.
Thank you.
So our panel is called Winners or Quitters, which sounds, of course, like an oxymoron, but in fact, I'm joined by 3 women who went their own way and defined success on their own terms. So a few things this session is not. We're not telling you to quit your job. To offhandedly suggest to someone that if their job that isn't working for them, that they should just quit rings dumb. We aren't about that. Let's focus rather on why and how. Why should you quit? How do you go about setting yourself up for success as a freelancer or entrepreneur? One other disclaimer, if you want to work for WNYC, NPR, or any public media org or network, we support you. Work it can be one of the ways you get there. However, the hope for this session is that working for a big audio company isn't the only example you have for what success in this field looks like. So to that end, I am joined by Chiquita Paschal, independent editor, Jenna-Weiss Berman, co-founder of Pineapple Street Media, and Rekha Murthy, who is an independent podcast strategist. Welcome all. I think the first question I want to ask, because it's the one that I'm most curious about, and that is, what is the actual appeal of working for yourself beyond just saying, I'm working for myself? Because to me, like, the agita of managing your payroll or your hours or your, how you negotiate meetings, all these things that actually, like, CEO type folks, or not even CEO type folks, but people who are in positions, it's a lot of responsibility, I guess is what I'm saying, and I would love to know from each of you what it is that you think, what is the most appealing to you about being independent workers? Yeah.
The thing that first came to mind when you asked that, actually, is my happy place, which is this reservoir in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I put in my earbuds, I queue up, like I have dozens and dozens of podcast episodes queued up, and I just walk. And I can do that anytime I want. But then more seriously, the variety. I love the variety of being able to work for myself, the projects that I can choose. In fact, I realize that sometimes some of the stress that I impose on myself is self-imposed precisely because I want variety as opposed to long-term commitment. I was somebody in this crowd, actually, I was talking to them about this, and all of a sudden I realized I actually am making it harder sometimes with the hustle because I love trying new things and working with as many people as possible as opposed to one longer-term project.
So it sounds, though, a little bit like there is something meditative or a meditative aspect that has to go into this decision, right? Whatever it is.
Oh, yes.
For some people it might be real meditation, but something has to happen to balance out whatever stress you might have. Jenna, is that true for you?
Oh, I'm not good at stress management, if that's what you're asking. To me, like, I know that people are like, oh, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, or I don't want to have a boss or whatever. I never felt that way.
Yeah.
So it was actually something I think I like actively avoided, was like starting my own company or doing my own thing, and I was always pretty happy working at other places. But I actually think in the end that, like, not wanting to be an entrepreneur but doing the thing that you should be doing is maybe better, because I know so many people who go into this, who like go off by themselves or start companies just because they want to have companies, but not because they necessarily have like a vision or a reason why they want to have companies.
Wait, walk that back just a little bit.
That's mostly men, but yeah. Yeah.
But you said the reason that you didn't want to, like, you actively avoided being an entrepreneur or starting your own company.
I think so.
But that the reason to do it is not necessarily because you do or don't want to, but because it's what you're good at?
I think, like, the reason to start a company is you should start a company or go out on your own if you have a good idea and, like, a good kind of path and vision for it. But I think a lot of people kind of do it just because they don't want to have a boss anymore. And so I guess what I'm saying is like it's good to do it if you really if you know what you want to do and you have a plan. Like we were super conservative about it. We knew that we needed to have like a certain amount of money committed before I even like quit my job to start a new thing. Like we needed to have a certain amount of money committed to the company. So I think that it's just not a good reason to go out on your own just because you want to go out on your own.
Right. I mean, that's what I was sort of trying to get at, which is I don't have a boss. Well, all right, but that's not. It doesn't stop there. Chiquita, what is it that appeals to you? And then also we sort of talked about this kind of meditative, or how do you balance out the stress of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you brought up the stress aspect, because there's actually stress in my last full-time job, or full-time jobs in general, that made freelancing full-time for myself really appealing. I mean, I used to work in daily news, so very deadline-heavy jobs where just a ton of stress all the time, and then also because I'm a first-generation graduate in my family and the highest earner in my family, and there's a lot of gaps within my own personal family structure, which I see some other people out there like nodding their head, and it can be really alienating when you exist inside of organizations that kind of assume that your family looks one way or has certain needs. It's not common for a person in their late 20s or early 30s to be taking care of their grandmothers in all of these, especially kind of white, middle class, upper middle class based organizations. But that was the place that I found myself in. And so, my grandma got really sick last year while I was in the middle of producing Uncivil, which was a huge show, which really demanded like 200% of my energy. And it really kind of put my back against the wall. And I had kind of an impossible choice to make between, either try to destroy myself and try to meet all of these expectations, both professionally and personally, or reprioritize. And so, maybe it's not necessarily that you have a family, caretaker situation. Maybe it's that you're starting a family or you're a new mom. Like there are so many situations that could lead you to have to reprioritize your life around work. And this is something that allowed me to do that.
And what did that reprioritization look like, and how did you manage the resentment of having to do that?
Therapy. Which is hard to come by if you don't have health insurance, which is something else we'll get into. It was really hard. There's no way around that. But I tried to take stock before when I was evaluating sort of what are my options, stay in this, try to push myself, or try to go out on my own. And I think because I had previously worked in jobs which allowed me to really expand my professional network, I knew that I was known beyond just the organization that I worked in. Mm-hmm. I'd previously been at NPR, I worked at PRX, I did a year-long business fellowship at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting as one of their inaugural executive fellows. So I had learned a lot of these kind of soft skills and management skills even that I ended up being able to apply to myself. And at the end of the day, I was like, I recognize that maybe some of the challenges I face are not uncommon, especially as managers encounter them. So if I can figure out how to solve these things for myself, and I can sort of like tackle these roadblocks for myself, that'll make me a better leader overall when I finally am ready to rejoin an organization.
So you were talking about taking stock of your skills. Jenna, you mentioned having enough money to leave your job. And you, Rekha, are talking about your drive for variety. So what are the things you absolutely had to have, more than, maybe more than one thing, in place before you went out on your own?
That's a great question. Fortunately, thanks to the regular full-time work that I had been doing over the years, I was in a place in my career where I had so many contacts and connections. I also had a much better understanding of the things that I was good at and the things that I loved to do, and those weren't always the same. So, for example, when I was at PRX and I was there for 7 years, I really enjoyed the work I did. I was on special projects. I was working on distribution and audience development and supporting indie producers. So I built this great network of contacts that also helped me know how to bring content visibility and exposure and audience. But my real love that I wanted to get back to from my days at NPR as a producer was maybe not hands-on tape cutting anymore, but content development, design, and some of the more editorial things. And so I was able to use the skills that I had gotten while at PRX to kind of ease my transition and derive like some income and support and connections from what I already knew, while also continuing to move in more of a direction of something that I wanted to do even more.
Jenna, how do you even begin to go about knowing how much money you need to start a company?
I did a lot of projections, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was self-taught, and I was not always right. I was often wrong. But for us, you know, if you saw me talk here last year, you know I sometimes drop numbers, and I can talk about specific numbers. Just don't tweet them or something. But I felt like if we had $700,000 committed to projects that we were going to do, that we could hire like 2 to 3 people and like be okay for a little while.
Where does that come from?
I just
$700,000?
I know it's a lot of. It sounds like a lot of money, but we wanted to pay our producers well. That was really important.
No, I understand what you wanted to do with
Yeah.
it. I'm trying to figure out where it came from.
Well, so the way that our company, Pineapple Street, works is a lot of it is that we get paid production fees to make shows for like partners. So we don't, it's not necessarily a network. We don't own a lot of our stuff, but we get paid by people. So we had, I was just like being a little, like probably too crazy about it, but I was like, I'm not gonna leave my secure job. Also, I had a kid who was born a month after I started the company, so I had to like sort of think about some of these things. Also, my wife went into labor when I was on stage 2.5 years ago at Work It. Some of you might remember that. I stayed on stage. It's a point of contention.
I can imagine.
It was. I wouldn't do it again. But where was I? I forgot what I'm talking about. But anyway, oh yeah. So I think we just like figured out an amount of money, and that like we would both feel comfortable like leaving security and secure jobs to do. And I know it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but I'm like I'm like I have a big fear of not having money.
Again, where did it come from?
Where did that number come from?
No, where did the money come from?
Oh, it came from, we signed up we got like contracts, 5 contracts for different projects. So some were branded, some were, like we did something for the New York Times, we did something with Lena Dunham, we did Hillary Clinton's campaign podcast, and then we did a few branded shows, and those, as some of you know, pay pretty well. So it's not that we like had all that money in the bank account at once, but we knew that like over the first, like 6 months or so, that we would have that amount of money coming in, and that meant that we could hire 2 people and then another person, and now we have 20 people, which is a lot more than what we started with. But yeah, so that was where the money came from. It was through these production fees, because we knew we didn't want to take venture capital also. So you have to, if you don't take venture capital when you're starting a company, you have to figure out how to make the money that you're paying people. It's like an actual business. So that's what we did. I am dissing VC-backed places when I say that. I'm sorry.
Chiquita?
I think there's also, like, agency was one of the biggest motivators for me in making, so even though I felt like I was kind of pushed into the situation by circumstance, I also saw an opportunity within it, because one of my biggest professional goals had been to become an editor, and every time I would go to a new organization, I'd be like, where do editors come from? How do I get to be one? And no one could ever give me a really good answer. It was a lot of like, oh, well, I just was. And there was no real origin story behind it, and not a lot of clear examples of specific paths that I could take within my career. And at this point, I'd been a producer for about 7 years, which was great, and I felt like I knew my craft really well, but was getting frustrated at the inability to kind of really lean into the parts of the job that I'm best at. Like, I suck at time zone math. Like, don't hire me to book your guests. Like, that's not the best use of my energy, but like my skills in editing have always been the thing that have kept me employed as a producer, and this seemed like a really good strategic opportunity to take on projects that would allow me to really shine in what I am good at.
And what about the lack of or the amount of work that is out there? Does it ebb and flow? Do you feel quite confident that it's going to stay, busy? What is the reality of work and how much there is?
Well, I mean, the good news is at the time, 3.5 years ago, when I first ventured into this independent space, that was really when podcasts were taking off, and I happened to be one of the relatively few who actually had been with podcasts in some form for almost 10 years at that point. So I feel like, sorry, with it.
Just how do you manage the lack of
the balance?
Or how do you know that there's going to be work to sustain your company?
There's been no shortage, really, and I tend to be very conservative on these things, and I would never want to say to somebody, go out there and there's going to be a ton of work. But frankly, I get to the point where I'm eager to refer work to other people. And because there's often a lot of work, and it may or may not be work that I can or want to do at that time, it's become an opportunity actually for me as a mentor and to also like raise up additional talent. So right now it feels good. Once in a while I'll have a month where I don't have something lined up and I feel like a waste of space and I freak out and I don't do the low priority things on my list because I'm just busy getting more work, and then it floods in again. But I think because of where I was in my career also when I launched, and I'm kind of hearing this from both of you as well, that, I did freelance in my 20s when I was early career, and that was a different kind of picture. And so I would definitely want to emphasize that too.
I mean, that makes me think it's similar, it's not the same, but as a journalist, freelancing, and it was just, and this is what I keep going back to, it's just a nightmare of like invoicing and counting literally the days before the payment is processed. And it sounds like the freelancing that it's not freelancing. Right? Or is it?
Yeah, well, if I may, and I've done a lot of perma-temping, if you will, at a lot of our big journalistic institutions. And one of my goals when I went into this was to be able to parse out what skills I had and assign value to them. And so every project that I sign on to, there's always a conversation in that consulting phase about what am I going to be doing and what is that going to look like. So that's allowed me to build a really diverse portfolio of projects that kind of step into all these different areas. And in that way, that's a very different experience than signing on to what should be a full-time job that you're just being
so identifying, and I am admiring of that ability, like the being able to identify your skill set is a skill in and of itself. And then you assign value to those skills.
And a lot of that is like conversations with peers within our industry, and that includes men. Like, find a white man, ask him how much he makes, and then add like 10% and like, bullshit tax, and use that as your baseline.
Yep.
And finding other benchmarks like that you can actually quantify what these things are. And then there are also things like emotional labor. I felt really uncomfortable after a certain period of time in my career because I kind of kept getting flagged for a lot of diversity roles or diversifying roles, or like, come here and help us tell better stories about, and those are all really, it's important work, but I think it's grossly undervalued work. Having to go and study my slave ancestors every day and talk to people who are like experiencing this tremendous pain, part of that, my job is to kind of filter that and figure out how to turn that into content that's actually going to help people or help a culture like understand this aspect of our consciousness. That is work, and it deserves to be paid as such.
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of along the lines of figuring out how to value your work. So I'm 3.5 years in now, and I feel like I'm so much better now at valuing the work I do and asking for what it's worth. So I'll say, like, straight up, when I first started, I was billing hourly at times. I'd make an introduction that would change the course of someone's podcast, and then I'd bill for 15 minutes. And, that just wasn't working, but it can be really, really hard to figure out how to abstract that and what the formula is. At the same time, I was listening to a few podcasts by white male podcasters who have podcasts about how to be a podcaster. And one of them mentioned, I think it was Cliff Ravenscraft, but don't hold me to that. And he said something like he was charging $300 an hour just for you to have the benefit of his wisdom without any prep.
Wow.
Now, I wouldn't do that personally because I feel like for most of the type of people that I want to help, they wouldn't be able to access me, and that's not also that's about also knowing who I am and what my values are and what I want to accomplish in this life. Charging $300 an hour just isn't that. But once I heard that, I definitely raised my rates for certain people some of the time.
So we are running behind, and so I want to make sure that we get at least, or we have time for 2 questions. We've got standing mics on either side of the stage. If you have questions, 2, we have time for 2. Please make them succinct. And
can I say one quick thing about the question you just asked, which I just want to tell you all that this is a really amazing time in podcasting, and there's so much work to go around. I have lists of I see people in the audience who are on my lists of 20 freelancers that I can throw things to we're helping to build up new kind of pineapple style companies. We don't even see them as competition because we just are all so overwhelmed with work that if you have these skills, it's such an incredible time. I'm not going to necessarily say that you should quit your jobs, but you can email me to get on our freelancers list if you want, if you really know how to make podcasts. And if you what? If you really know how to make a podcast.
Because if you don't.
If you don't, it's probably I shouldn't refer you to make someone's podcast. But it's just it's golden times, and you're all very lucky to know these things.
Halcyon days, okay.
Playing peekaboo over here. Jenna, I was hoping you could talk through your funding model a little more, how you are either working with the podcast you're producing to raise the funds to pay for that production, or whether they're coming to you with the money in hand.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And actually, I think that the way we work at Pineapple is probably not far from how a freelancer works, where we do some projects that are going to maybe lose us money that we really care about and are excited about, and then other projects that fill the gaps, for brands and things like that. But yeah, we're basically, most of our funding is just people come to us and they want us to make shows, and they find the money for them, and then we help them find ads for their shows. So we help them make up, hopefully, all of the money that they've paid us. And then, we're changing a little bit now, and we're doing some things that we that are fully owned by us and kind of self-funded, or that we get ad advances for, which is a possible thing for people. Is you can go to a mid-roll or a place like that and say I have this great show idea. Can you give me an ad advance, and you can sell the ads on the show, and then I have some money up front. So those are kind of the main models. But yeah, a lot of what we're doing is kind of we make branded shows for brands that pay for the things that don't necessarily make a ton of money. And I think it's kind of a good way to think about this as an independent person, because if you can be doing one thing that pays you a lot and then one thing that you really love and care about, it's kind of sustainable that way.
Is there another question? If there isn't, I'm going to ask another question, and that is, how, given that there's so much work, how do you decide or choose what you do take on and what you don't take on? Chiquita?
I think one of the first things that I did after I quit my job was sleep for 3 days. And then after after a period of rest, when I was ready to get back on it, I wrote a list of priorities and did a lot of intention setting. So trying to figure out, in its highest abstract form, like what were my values?
Did you just say intention setting?
Yes, intention setting. So what are my values? What are my skills that I most want to bring to these projects? And what is the spectrum of work that I would be interested to look like? And once I had figured that out for myself, once I started getting doing client development and getting referrals, I had like a rubric. I had a way that I could kind of like check myself or check these opportunities against what my internal goals were. So I think that kind of allowed me to have a roadmap, and so it wasn't just like every time I was throwing something, I was like, I don't know, do I do this? Do I not do this? So I was like, no, I do these kinds of things. Maybe there was some kind of gray area ones where I was like, oh, this is interesting, but maybe it's not worth the energy that I would have to expend, and I don't want to do this, or I don't enjoy it. And those are just things you kind of have to learn through taking on certain projects.
So is there a list of maybe questions or a check-off list of things like, does it fulfill this? Does it fulfill this? Does it send off this red flag? Or
yeah, some of it may be in like the team dynamics, right? Like I want to know, like, what are the expectations for showing up to work, or how does working remotely, how's that going to work within the context of this project? Who's in charge of the deadline? Am I in charge of the deadline? Am I leading a team? Am I delegating work? Am I helping people? Am I really kind of in a role where I'm teaching people or bringing people along? Like that's also things that I like to do. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways that you could break down a project and the things that you could get or give from it. But you really just kind of have to look at me. I've started by looking at the past work that I've done as a jumping off point and be like, okay, what did I really enjoy, but maybe didn't get a chance to dig into as much as I would have liked, or what were opportunities that maybe passed me by that, I really want to revisit that. And then I would say one of the biggest lessons I learned is and this one's really hard, because you kind of have to build up enough momentum and stability in order to get there, but leaving space for surprise, leaving space for those incredible opportunities that kind of come to you, and also leaving space for creativity. Because one of my biggest underpinning goals is that I had my own show that I wanted to develop, and I knew that I kind of needed to build the infrastructure of what would basically be like an independent production entity in order to do that. And that's something that I've been building little bit by little bit, but it hasn't necessarily been, I'm not a Pineapple Street, but I am a person who realizes that I have to have a certain kind of structure or foundation in order to make those things happen. So that was the other kind of goal, is okay, well, how will these projects that I take on allow me to get closer to my own creative goals?
Y'all sound so organized. I mean, I feel like I feel like there are folks out amongst us who really should just not do this. I would be one of those people. Like, what?
I mean, much respect for that motto.
Y'all don't be journaling? Like what?
In my case, I mean, in my first year, I did everything from a public radio style podcast to an international intellectual property law firm to a taxi and livery fleet that wanted to reach people in the industry. I basically just tried anyone who came to me. I was open as long as you weren't going to make the world a worse place.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Well,
that would be a really interesting niche.
But that's the other thing too. Like you were saying, you could or might charge this amount of money, but you don't want to be inaccessible. You don't want to be like this, a capitalist.
Well, that's like your balance of branded and not branded. For me, it is sort of like that. Like I was just talking to a multinational corporation last week, but then I was looking at my list for 2018 and 2019 and saying, you know what? Public radio is still feels like a home. Public media feels like a home in some ways, even though I'm also really far from it. And I feel like the more I spend in podcasts, I feel like my view of the world and of media actually improves greatly. But whatever public radio represents in its best self, I kind of like to make sure I'm still anchored there, even if the actual manifestation of that may actually functionally have nothing to do with public media. But it's so much more by the gut and by the heart than this amazing matrix that Chiquita just laid out.
Final word, Jenna?
Oh, okay. On this subject?
Yes.
Okay.
Or if you have another
I didn't know if
word
you wanted me to like give a
yeah.
speech or something.
If there's another word.
I think that the part of when we're thinking about what work we want to take, and this is important, I think, for everyone, is like you want to set the cost as something that won't make you like kind of resentful when you're working on it. Like you want, if there's a big brand and I'm not like super thrilled about it, and I know they have a lot of money, and I know that like they're going to be tough to work with, I want to like set the price at what I think it's going to cost me partially emotionally.
Which is exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's like the emotional labor stuff. And I think a cool thing is like when you get more and more confident in your abilities and in the market, you can start to like say no to things. And I feel like the ability to like say no to projects that you don't want to do, to me, is like, that's the dream. That's all I ever wanted, was to like be able to say no when I didn't want to do something. And like we're there, and I think the industry is really there. Like there's so much demand and not enough supply that like you can just say no, and it feels really good.
That would be a good last word, but Rekha has one more thing to say.
I don't need the last word.
No, but just very quickly, I feel like I also, for the parents out there, I feel like I should say, I have 2 little ones, and actually, even though I haven't acknowledged that, and I'm grateful to Chiquita and to Jenna for bringing that up, I feel like it needs to be a really valid, legitimate, and like front row consideration, and it can work. Like, I feel like the best thing I did for my family was to go into business for myself, and it actually has also worked out really well professionally. But I just felt duty-bound to say that because it is really an essential part of this.
Thanks to our guests, Rekha Murthy, Jenna-Weiss Berman, and Chiquita Paschal.